Hi, welcome to Art You Crazy, the podcast that flips the script on the struggling artist paradigm.
We're your hosts, Tessie
and Erin Elizabeth Reed.
Two artistic multi-hyphenates who believe that every person is creative.
And every creative should pursue their passions. Each episode,
we shine a light on our and others' creative journeys along the pathway to personal success.
If living a life of creative purpose sounds daring, then yeah, you could call us crazy.
We embrace it.
And we want to know, aren't you crazy too? No, seriously.
'Cause we are.
In today's episode, I'm putting my money where my mouth is and sharing some of my crazy art. We're going to read a short story I wrote a handful of years ago in response to a writing prompt about how many stories within stories can you tell. It's called Torchbearer, and Tessie's going to help me read it.
Torchbearer, 2020. By Erin Elizabeth Reed.
100 years ago, in a land not unlike this, there lived a seer who had the gift of foresight. Wanting to use her gift for good, she would walk about the village, speaking to anyone she passed, with warnings of ill events that were to come. But being that the land was in a state of plenty and everyone had what they needed, and more, the community largely ignored her, then branded her a nuisance, and finally cast her out. And so, living in the woodland, alone but for her wild creatures and growing plants, who each knew the heartbeat of the earth's turnings and welcomed easily one of their own, she kept her secrets to herself for many, many years. Until one day, sensing the end of her own life drawing near, she began to desire a companion who might listen to her and bear her keen knowledge into the future. A torchbearer to preserve the great visions until the time when humankind was ready to receive them openly. At the edge of the village, where the clearing kissed the trees, a solemn, widowed woodcutter had built his home. He was often preoccupied between his chopping and his hewing and his planing, and so his young daughter had grown accustomed to communing with herself and the wind and the deer. She was a lovely thing at 13, not yet a woman, but no longer quite a child, and was sorely in need of mothering. The seer saw the opportunity was ripe. The next day, she rose with the sun, put on her brown sackcloth cloak, and made for the woodcutter's cottage. She sent a meadowlark ahead of her to perform reconnaissance, and, satisfied the girl was alone, knocked on the door with the head of her gnarled walking stick.
I am on my way to see my cousin in the nearby village, and I'm weary from walking. May I rest at your heart for a bit?
The seer smiled her most ingratiatingly.
Of course you may. Please come in,
the girl replied, and opened wide the door to let her pass.
Would you like a cool drink of water while you sit? That's very kind of you, dear, but I am afraid I have nothing to repay your kindness.
The seer paused.
Unless you'll accept a story in payment?
The girl's eyes lit up. A story? Human conversation of any kind was limited in her world to the mundane mutterings of chores to be done and prayers to be said. The prospect of speech for the sake of fantasy was alluring indeed.
I'll fetch you that drink right away.
And she cantered off to the well and back again before the beat of a hummingbird's wing. Settled at the old woman's feet, she listened as the seer spun her tale.
100 years from now, in a land not so very unlike this one, there lives a seer who has the gift of foresight. Wanting to use her gift for good, she walks about the community, speaking to anyone she passes, with rousing news of positive changes that are to come. But being that the land is in a state of decay and many haven't what they need, while few have too much, the people largely ignore her. They do not dare to hope because they are not yet able to see past their own noses. They brand her a nuisance, then a lunatic, and finally cast her out. And so, living in the desert, alone but for her hardy reptiles and persevering cacti, who each know the heartbeat of the earth's turnings and welcome easily one of their own, she keeps her secrets to herself for many, many years. Until one day, sensing the end of her own life drawing near, she begins to desire a companion who might listen to her and bear her king knowledge into the future. A torchbearer to preserve the great visions until the time when humankind is ready to receive them openly. At the edge of the desert, where the sand whispers to the grass, a solemn widower caravanner has built his home. He often is preoccupied with his cameling and his dunning and his expeditions. And so his young daughter has grown accustomed to communing with herself and the sun and the salt. She's a lovely thing at 13, not yet a woman, but no longer quite a child, and is sorely in need of mothering. The seer sees that the opportunity is ripe. The next day, she rises before dawn, puts on her brown sackcloth cloak, and makes for the caravanner's hut. She sends a falcon ahead of her to perform reconnaissance, and when she is satisfied that the girl is alone, knocks on the door with the head of her gnarled walking stick.
I am on my way to see my cousin in the nearby outpost, and I am weary from walking. Might I rest at your hearth for a bit?
The seer smiles her most ingratiatingly.
Of course you may. Please come in.
The girl replies and opens wide the door to let her pass.
Would you like a cool drink of water while you sit?
That's very kind of you, dear. But I'm afraid I have nothing to repay your kindness.
The seer pauses.
Unless you'll accept a story in payment.
The girl's eyes light up. A story? Human conversation of any kind is limited in her world to the mundane mutterings of chores to be done and prayers to be said. The prospect of speech for the sake of fantasy is alluring indeed.
I'll fetch you that drink right away.
And she bounds off to the well and back again before the strike of a sun ray. Settled at the old woman's feet, she listens as the seer spins her tale.
1,000 years from now, in a land not so very unlike this one, there will live a seer who has the gift of foresight. Wanting to use her gift for good, she will walk about the seaside, speaking to anyone she passes, with bracing news of verdant work that is to come. But being that the land will be in a state of early rejuvenation, and many are weary from the labors of their forebears, despite having lifted no tools themselves, the people will largely ignore her. They will not presume to need to help, because they will not yet consider themselves a part of nature. They will brand her a nuisance, then a threat, and finally will cast her out. And so, living by the ocean, alone but for her maritime denizens and aquatic kelp, who each know the heartbeat of the earth's turnings and welcome easily one of their own, she will keep her secrets to herself for many, many years. Until one day, sensing the end of her own life drawing near, she will begin to desire a companion who might listen to her and bear her keen knowledge into the future. A torchbearer to preserve the great visions until the time when humankind will be ready to receive them openly. At the edge of the sea, where the cliffs bow to the waves, a solemn, widowed fisherman will have built his home. He often will be preoccupied with his netting and his hooking and his gutting, and so his young daughter will have grown accustomed to communing with herself and the water and the horizon. She will be a lovely thing at 13, not yet a woman, but no longer quite a child, and will be sorely in need of mothering. The seer will see that the opportunity is ripe. The next day she will rise with the tide, put on her brown sackcloth cloak, and make for the fisherman's shack. She will send an albatross ahead of her to perform reconnaissance. And when she is satisfied that the girl is alone, will knock on the door with the head of her gnarled walking stick.
away to see my cousin in the nearby hamlet, and I'm weary of walking. May I rest at your heart for a bit?
The seer will smile her most ingratiatingly.
Of course you may. Please come in.
The girl will reply and open wide the door to let her pass.
Would you like a cool drink of water while you sit? That's very kind of you, dear. But I'm afraid I have nothing to repair your kindness.
The seer will pause.
Unless you'll accept a story in payment.
The girl's eyes will light up. A story. Human conversation of any kind will have been limited in her world to the mundane mutterings of chores to be done and prayers to be said. The prospect of speech for the sake of fantasy will be alluring indeed.
I'll fetch you that drink right away.
And she will bound off to the well and back again before the crest of a wave. Settled at the old woman's feet, she will listen as the seer spins her tale.
And when the seer has finished her story, the caravanner's daughter's eyes will spark. She will sense that there is more to this old woman in her home. Her mind will race in time with her heart. Ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. She will want to know more.
What happens then? Does the fisherman's daughter run off and learn the seer's secrets? Does she keep the torch lit for all humankind?
The caravanner's daughter asks. The seer will smile with a quiet hope.
That all depends on you.
The woodcutter's daughter's eyes sparked. She sensed that there was more to this old woman in her home. Her mind raced in time with her heart. She wanted to know more.
What happened then? Did the caravanner's daughter run off and learn the seer's secrets? Did she keep the torch lit for all humankind?
The woodcutter's daughter asked. The seer smiled with a quiet hope.
That all depends on you.
I love how you use the present, past, and future in every time she wants to give her visions of the world, and how every time people are not ready to listen because either they're prompting the future or they're focused on the past or what they're currently doing. So I find that incredible. And it has a rhythm on its own. This is the stories that I think that they could read in a campfire.
Yeah.
In the old days when there was not a lot of internet and things to do. So I love it. My inner child is like,
oh, thank you.
Tell me more.
I'm so tickled that you picked up on that because the shifts are intentional, but they are kind of subtle. Yeah, so I'm tickled that you picked up on that. Yeah, and I definitely did have fireside story time in mind, pre-industrial revolution storytelling in mind as a way of when stories were used, really, truly used to impart wisdom and history down from generation to generation. And like to keep the thread of the culture, the mythology, family histories and things alive when that was the main way.
I think it is quite universal because it doesn't really bring me to a particular culture. It could be for any culture. And I love how you weave unless there is a place that there is no ocean at all.
Mm-hmm. It was important to me, too, that the seer was a female. That was significant to me. She has the ultimate wisdom, but society's not ready to listen to a woman with guidance. And she seeks out another female to keep that wisdom alive,
To all of you that are listening, this is such an experiment. We decided to do this maybe 10, 12 minutes ago.
Yeah.
And so Erin, that possesses an amazing encyclopedia of her own writings, she was kind enough and brave enough to share this piece of her writing for this podcast and kind enough to let me be part of the story, reading the characters and failing and, letting me do my very cliche old ladies. And then all of a sudden I included a Spanish girl there.
I loved it. I thought it was great. I was like, yes, brilliant, of course. Thank you. Thank you, Tessie, for encouraging and saying yes. I'm so glad that you were willing to participate and read this little story. I really just wrote it just for fun, just for me, just an act of creativity. And so thank you all for for listening. It is a little vulnerable.
Of course it is. It is.
So there you go.
Bada bing, bada boom.
Bada bing, bada boom.
The tale is done.
Hey, I'm sure you loved this episode. Before you go, here are 3 ways you can help us keep things crazy.
You could just leave us a rating or share this episode so more people can access this content. Easy peasy, right?
Feeling ultra crazy?
Donate to the show by clicking the link provided in the podcast description or on our Instagram's bio.
I'm sure you will.
Stay crazy out there, y'all.
Stay crazy!